Welcome to the segment, It Happened to Me. Why I created this is I want you to know you're not alone. When we're with a difficult, or disturbing, or a toxic person, we get kind of isolated. In my terms, they do a good job of culling us from the herd to make us feel like we don't count, that we're off stuck in a corner somewhere. And I want you to know you're so not. You're so not. So I created this feature, It Happened to Me. And today my guest is Dr. Gary Shaler. It happened to him. So Gary, tell us something about your story and how it happened to you.
Well, I think what I'd like to share is, I've told people before, it's in the book and everything, that, I had this borderline mother, and she was very violent. My first memory is jumping up and down on a bed and saying no. And, there's no headlines tomorrow in the San Francisco Chronicle are going to say 2-year-old says no. That's not, you're going to see that. But it was for my mother, and she slapped me as hard as she could. I actually careened off a bedpost. I had those bedposts, and I hit a wall about 5 feet up the wall. And I remember thinking, I'll never say no again. Now, later on, this is the sort of catch-22 that you get when you're borderlines. And and this time my identity got involved, because the 2-year-old doesn't have any identity. But this one was, I began to define me. The abuse began to define who I was. It was in second grade. No, it was in third grade. And I came up from school at the beginning, and I was talking about 2 girls who were really, really, really good in math. And they were the math tutors, and I was the science tutor for Mrs. Graham, right? And they were African American, and we called them colored people at that time. And I said, and we've got these 2 colored girls. And my mother, who was extremely prejudiced, turned to me and says, Gary, in my house, you call them niggers. You got that straight? Now, if that word offends you, especially if you're African American, I apologize, but this is what I was dealing with. And I remember thinking, Mom must be having a bad day. Everybody knows you don't call black people that. So I kind of passed it off. Well, 3 weeks later, I come home and I begin to talk about Diane and Teresa again. And I use the word colored. And she goes, you will call them. And she uses the N word. And she literally throws me over the kitchen table, grabs one of the kitchen tables, chairs, and begins to beat me, saying, you will call them.
Oh.
And she hit me 5 times in the middle. And I remember being in a turtle position, and I thought she broke my ribs, and she's screaming. But down there, some part of me said, this is so wrong. It's so unfair. And I made a decision. What I said was, you can bend me, a woman, but you will never break me. Now, there was and at that point in time, I decided she could not have my soul, which was the really, really wonderful, good, and redeeming thing. However, years later, when I tell this to my therapist, they listen, and then they say to me, after I get to that, I said, that was the place I defined myself. I got all my determination to get to be a PhD. I got all of my drive. Nobody could break me. And then they said, so what's it like going through the rest of your life bent over backwards? That was the downside of the upside. And I realized, oh my God, I had lost my right to assert. It could only be turned inward. It could only as a stubborn rebellion. Mm-hmm. Now, it's reclaiming that will. Now, to some extent, I did. Because in high school, when I got a little bigger, I read every book by Martin Luther King, and I made sure she saw it. And we got into these. Now, the funny thing is we got into these. It's reclaiming your voice from that 2-year-old to that 7-year-old was a process. That was my first, just passive aggressively, I'm going to read Martin Luther King. And then we got into these arguments. And the funny thing is you can't win these arguments with somebody like that. What reason didn't put into a person, reason won't take out. We got to the same place, and what she would say to me is, after I had thoroughly intellectually challenged her, was, well, if there's any niggers in heaven, I don't want to be there. What do you think about that, Mr. Smarty Pants, Mr. Going to College? At one point, I got wise enough to say, this is stupid on my part. I will not do this. Years later, though, when I'm 25 and I've got a master's degree, I'm at a family reunion and all the family are there. I stop in for a couple hours and she goes on about this. And I figure this time I'm going to trounce her. We go through the same thing. And this time there's no fear in me. I've grown some. Now I'm a man, right? But you're still learning it. And the funny thing was she says that at the end of it, and all the family are going, "Oh, Mr. College Education," because nobody in my family graduated from high school, let alone get a master's. And I remember thinking, what do I say to such stupidity? And I looked up to God and I said, "Oh my God, what do I say?" And I hear this voice that kind of says, "You've got to think like her." And I'm going, "Are you nuts? Are you crazy?" And then this thought came to me that was so perfect and so wonderful that I said, and I thought, I didn't know you thought that way. And I turned and I looked at her and I said, "That's okay, Mom. There's going to be some in the other place too." Now, and then later on, I learned my life was a process of reclaiming my right to assert my truth without the rebellion, the pure, this is my truth. If I were to do it now as who I am after the man that doesn't have to bend over backwards, because I was still bending over backwards, I was still playing her game.
Right. The balance wasn't there.
Yeah, I was still in her trenches. She was defining the game and I couldn't even see it. Mm-hmm. These days, I would probably say to my mother, "I am so sorry that whatever happened to you made you so afraid of anybody who's different." And I would leave it at that. It's a process. And so if you're out there and you're listening to this, if you've gone through that physical abuse, just start looking for the thing that you did to survive is often your limiting suit as well. Because bending over backwards the rest of my life was a horrible way to go through my relationships. Now I can create a full love because I can properly assert, and all couples have to assert with each other, lest there be resentment. And that was what was kind of big before.
Beautiful, beautiful. As with everybody, I'm so sorry you had that experience. And as with everybody, it gave you a springboard to being the absolute best you can be, because it allowed you to say, "I know what I don't want. I know what I don't want to experience, and I know what I don't want to pass along." And however long that journey takes us, it's a worthwhile journey. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, it is. I look back now and I realize that some part of me has gained so much. I can sit in the chair, and when I'm with a client, and I can, without projecting, I can have real empathy. I understand it at a granular level, so I can help them navigate it. It's been a gift on the other side of reclaiming that, what I call a right to assert and a right to create my own experience. What happened back there's always a deeper purpose that you can find in it. And that becomes the superlative value of it. Not that we value the experience, but we value the lesson from the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story with me. It reminds me of a little story of my own mom. We're talking about hijackal parents. So it happened to us today. We're talking about hijackal parents. But, I remember my mom used to come home with these great victories, like I trounced that person, or I ruined their day, or I told them like it was. And one day she came home and she said, "I really took the wind out of her sails." And I heard that repeatedly over my youth, and finally I was about 15, and I had one of those moments of awareness like you had, and I just looked at her and I said, "I don't know why you're so happy about taking the wind out of her sails when it would be so much easier to take your sail out of her wind."
I love that.
And my mother did not know what to do with that. Just did not, because basically what you were talking about in your learning and what I learned in mine was a kind of non-resistance.
Yeah.
Like there is no point trying to better or fight with or confront this energy. we have to become who we are. And these experiences, if we allow them to, and if we get the help, will allow us to have the best life possible for ourselves. So thanks so much for sharing your story, Gary.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
My guest today is Dr. Gary Shaler. You can learn more about him at GaryShaler.com, GarySayler.com. He is a therapist. He's written books, but he's writing a wonderful book that will be out this year, 2018, called Safe to Love Again. And, you know, whether or not you're writing books and you're a therapist, or whether you are anywhere in your life's journey, all of these things apply. Things have happened to us, and we need to acknowledge them. We need to move through them and move on to what's possible for us. And I hope this segment, It Happened to Me, helps you relate to the fact that you're not alone. And if you'd like to tell your story, you can submit it on a form. Just go to forrelationshiphelp.com. That's HELP, forrelationshiphelp.com/submit. Thanks again, and join us for It Happened to Me.